Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Springtime in Vermont conjures up certain images. As the snow melts away, the sugar house steams into action. Our back roads turn to mud, and we renew connections with friends and neighbors after a bit of winter hibernation. Above all, spring is a season of renewal. The forests are awakening, the birds are returning, and on farms, there is life. Spring lambs are an example. And at the Parsons Farm in Richford, there are close to 80 newborn lambs. Longtime viewers may remember UVM Extension livestock specialist Chet Parsons. Chet is now retired, but he's still tending the flock.
We're at the Parsons Farm in Richford, Vermont. I'm Chet Parsons with my wife Kate. We've been raising sheep here for probably the last 30 years or so. We're supposed to be retired, but during lambing we're probably working harder than we've ever worked.
How many lambs on the ground this year, Chet?
We've got just about 80. Just about 80, yeah. They started lambing about St. Patrick's Day, and we got the majority of them lambed in the first 2.5 weeks or so. Of course, that's when it turned super cold, which is, I guess, that's farming. That's the way it works. So it was a little trying this year, but you know, you hope to have nice, easy weather. It makes it a lot easier to deal with. One day, I think we had 5 sets of twins and a set of triplets.
Is that common?
Well, it usually happens once or twice during lambing when it all happens. But, you know, with 80 lambs, you've got to get more than one a day. Between my wife and I, we spend quite a lot of time in the barn when they're lambing. You know, you've got to make sure. And I've been raising sheep that are pretty good mothers, so you know we don't have to do that much as a rule, but you do have to take care of them when you get up here and you find lambs. We put them in a lambing pen, you know, so give them a few days to get attached to each other, you know, so we can watch them and make sure they're doing okay, and then they get turned out with the rest. Sometimes you get some that don't have enough milk, and you have to supplement the milk. That's usually true with triplets. Usually the mother doesn't have enough milk to feed all 3, and sometimes you get an older ewe that's put all of her energy into having 2 beautiful lambs, but she doesn't have enough milk to feed them, so you have to supplement the milk. It's just part of the game.
Are they rambunctious?
Sometimes they form a lamb pack and tear around the barn here and kick up their heels and have a great time, yeah. But other times they're just happy to just lay and sleep and, you know, eat and sleep. The singles that really grow fast, you know, they'll be ready for market in probably 5 months or so. The majority will be more like 6 or 7. And then there'll be some stragglers that'll drag later than that, but yeah. But our plan is to get them up and going in good shape before grass gets here. And then when grass gets here, because they're pretty much totally grass-fed and grass-finished. I don't feed any grain. I do feed some alfalfa pellets. Right now the lambs can get in the creep and get alfalfa pellets if they want. And when the mothers are in the lambing pens, they get a little extra in the form of alfalfa pellets, but I don't feed any grain. Well, if you think you're going to get rich doing it, don't do it, because it's a challenge. But another thing, there aren't good markets available, so you pretty much have to develop your own markets, which we've done over the years. And that's always a challenge. Most farmers like the idea of raising animals. They don't like the idea of selling their product. So sometimes that's been a challenge, but we've been at it long enough, so we do pretty well.
Great to see all those new arrivals. Farm stands will be open before we know it, and farmers are making sure their operations are up to date on the latest food safety regulations. Keith Silva tells us more from a farm stand that's setting the standard.
At Cedar Circle Farm in East Thetford, the produce looks downright immaculate. From the greens in the cooler to the blueberries on the shelf, the food here is the epitome of healthy, wholesome, and nutritious. Out in the fields, a few hundred yards from the farm stand, it's a slightly different story.
It comes from the soil. Farming is not a clean job.
Maya Fisherburn is the processing lead at Cedar Circle Farm. She's the first line of defense in making sure the food sold here is as safe as it is fresh.
The moment that it comes out of the field, we try to process and get it into coolers as fast as we can. We fill up these 3 sinks, and we have a rinse, a wash, and a rinse again. Everything gets triple washed here.
Fisherburn takes pride in the farm's sanitation guidelines, and she expects every member of the staff to do likewise.
Everyone that works here, you're not just a harvester, or you're not just a weeder. To keep the standards that we want, I want the harvesters to know what it looks like when it's processed, how to process it, why it's so important that we keep good standards and don't get people sick and things like that,
The FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA for short, was signed into law in 2011. The law sets standards that focus on the prevention of foodborne illness rather than reacting to a problem after it occurs. The food safety guidelines Cedar Circle put in place before FSMA was enacted puts the business in good standing to be in compliance with the law.
Cedar Circle is a model in so many ways.
Lisa Chase works for University of Vermont Extension. She specializes in agricultural tourism. Even with Cedar Circle Farm's proactive approach to food safety, there are still details in the regulations that need to be worked out.
Well, one thing that's really challenging for a lot of farms in Vermont is that these federal regulations were created for large businesses, huge farms that have had problems with food safety in the past. So those regulations are often set up for an entirely different type of agricultural operation than what we often have in Vermont. So here we have smaller farms and not so many steps in the processing till it goes out the door. And especially with direct sales, the farmer and the consumer are often interacting directly. They know each other. So one of our jobs with Extension is to help farms comply with the regulations without having the regulations become such a burden.
In addition to the farm stand, Cedar Circle also operates a summer camp. There's a pick-your-own operation, and the farm hosts several yearly festivals. The farm's reliance on community interaction means the public has to be incorporated into the farm's requirements in regards to food safety.
Running a farm is complicated and challenging as is. And one of the ways that farms in Vermont have really succeeded is by building community and building these direct markets. So for a lot of farms like Cedar Circle, those community interactions and being open is a key part of their business model. It's having multiple business enterprises within an already complicated farm structure.
To keep everything running as efficient as possible, Cedar Circle uses signage to direct customers to what's off limits, where to go in a thunderstorm, and the farm's policy on pets. The signs are a subtle way to include the public into the farm's culture.
It's almost invisible. It becomes part of the system.
Hans Estrin is a produce safety specialist with UVM Extension.
Food safety and the practices, good practices around food safety, can be integrated to make a real efficient, profitable, and happy farm. And it can be a driver, in fact, because when you start to think through and put on these goggles of risk reduction and you look at your farm, what it drives you to is this separation, coming up with systems, standard operating procedures, and writing them all down and separating them.
Across the Fence first visited Cedar Circle Farm in 2011. At that time, the farm required visitors to wash their hands before going into U-pick areas. Customers were skeptical at first, but understood the policy was for the greater good.
I've never been asked to wash my hands before berry picking before.
Janet Cathy is a longtime Cedar Circle Farm customer. When she was asked to wash her hands before berry picking, she was happy to abide by the farm's policies.
Anybody could have something on their hands that isn't clean, so it makes sense to have your hands washed. And then I realized that I could be leaving something on the berries for somebody else to get, so I understand about being considerate.
We also learned in our 2011 visit that Cedar Circle has a food safety manual for employees. When Fisherburn started working here a few years ago, she didn't understand why the farm would need a food safety guide. She quickly caught on.
As a berry picker, when I first started here, I'm like, SOP system? I'm like, what? Yeah, they're teaching me to wash my hands and like rules and regulations, what not to do. But then during my second year, I'm like, wow, they actually have this all written down. What to do if like glass gets broken in here. They have every like scenario and even how to watch every vegetable. That's typed out. I'm very lucky to have inherited that, and I hope to like tweak it and keep going with it.
For Estrin, policies and procedures, like those in use and on display at Cedar Circle Farm and other Vermont farms, make for good business.
I think the most important thing for retaining the character and beauty and openness of Vermont farms for visitors is that each farmer knows their customers, they know what the regulations are, they know how to look at their farm and reduce risks, and they know how to interact with their customers. We don't have a cookie cutter way to solve this problem. That will really turn people off and it will hurt the industry. We really need each farm to take common sense regulation and integrate it into their own farm.
From the field to the farm stand, a little common sense goes a long way in making sure the freshest food from Vermont farms is also the safest. In East Thetford, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Thank you, Keith. And once again, thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.